I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We'd like to thank the Secretary General for preparing the informative report on the work of the organization in the course of the past year. Further moving over to a multipolar world was accompanied by growing conflict potential, growing terrorist threat, more dividing lines, and also migration. We also saw something similar in the area of development. Against the background of economic progress, we witnessed climate change, inequality, a weak infrastructure, and also we felt that there were few opportunities for the young. In these conditions, the UN had to constantly keep their hand on the pulse in order to continue monitoring the key changes and international changes and react to them quickly. And of course, an important way of helping this was the Secretariat of the United Nations and the Secretary General himself, and we would like to thank them for that. Madam President, we understand that the UN needs to adapt to the changing world, and the UN reform is a constantly ongoing process. New institutions and structures are being created, new agendas come up, and the peacekeeping activities becomes more varied. At the same time, some of the assessments of the events which already took place in this area and the proposals for future in the report is something that gives rise to questions on our part, and we would like to dwell on the following. According to the statement that the UN is the optimal platform in order to bring the efforts of member states and civil society in resolving topical issues. We are all in favor of making sure that the UN is as transparent as possible. At the same time, we should lose sight of the fact that the UN is an intergovernmental organization. The member states have the prerogative of decision-making at the UN. We also note the efforts made by the Secretariat in conflict settlement and peacekeeping, and this was helpful in resolving various crisis situations at the Security Council. At the same time, we regret the fact that the report does not deal with the nefarious role played by outside interference in creating new and maintaining old conflicts, and we call upon the Secretariat to pay close attention to that. Once again, we'd like to draw your attention to the loose interpretation in the report of the definitions of such entities as human rights violations, international humanitarian law violations. This is an unacceptable practice. We are happy with the way the report covers the coordination in humanitarian areas in resolving the so-called forgotten crisis. Here we think that the goal of the humanitarian pillar of the UN is to continue working patiently and consistently with donors and humanitarian recipient states in order to make sure that there is effective and comprehensive meeting of the need of those people who live in countries impacted by crises. Madam President, we agree that it's important to make sure that the humanitarian activities pay greater attention to the crisis in Yemen, which is the greatest one in terms of funding and complexity. We are convinced that humanitarian assistance arriving in this country from outside needs to be given to all people, regardless of who controls this or that swathe of their territory. When assessing humanitarian needs of people, what we need to do to make sure that our data is as reliable as possible. If we do that, then the humanitarian work conducted by the UN in crisis situations in various parts of the world is not politicized. We support the initiative launched in 2018 to have a thematic online portal. The portal accumulates country data about the implementation of the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction in 2015-2030. And we welcome the information in the report about the growing number of countries who have provided their national indicators. By the way, Russia joined in with the online system in 2019 and published our own official statistics covering the years 2015 to 2018. We also share the intent of the Secretary General to help countries in the area of arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation for the purpose of developing and strengthening the existing system of treaties and ensuring international peace and security. We regret the fact that because of the unresolved organizational issues in 2019, a disarmament commission session never took place. We do hope for assistance here from the UN Secretariat and the Secretary General personally in order to resolve the visa issues to make sure that there are no more unpleasant surprises similar to the ones we encountered last year. Otherwise, we will be yet once again raise the issue of finding an alternative venue for this session. We are committed to the goal of building a world free of nuclear weapons and other WMDs, and we support the intent of the Secretary General to ensure that there is a wide exchange of opinions here. This is particularly important given growing divergences between nuclear and non-nuclear states. Madam President, we welcome the efforts made by the Secretary General in order to implement the agreed reform in the development system of the UN. We're convinced that the main goal for the changes and reforms here should be making sure that the development system is in line with the 2030 agenda requirement, make sure that there's practical yield provided by programs, funds, and specialized agencies in the area of international development, and that there is a clear positioning of the development system in the UN in general, and there is a distribution of responsibility amongst UN organizations. At the same time, we expect that the ultimate outcome of reform will be not imposing on agencies of new, frequently politicized mandates and blowing up their staff, but rather making sure that there are clear principles for work and the management of the development system, whilst the national government's role in the interaction with the system is strengthening. We are convinced that a good example of the effective report will be showing the savings into development system in reports, and make sure that these savings are invested in the resident coordinators and project work. Madam President, in conclusion, I would like to say the following. What merits particular attention is the issue of ensuring that terrorists do not end up in the hands of terrorism. This is not reflected in the document. We expect that the Secretariat will carefully investigate the many instances where ISIL members in Syria ended up with impressive arsenals of modern weaponry. And we should not pass over in silence over the following fact that jihadists in the region would not have been able to counter the armed forces of several states in the conflict without arms support coming from abroad. I thank you.